I want to welcome everybody on behalf of Grolier Poetry Bookshop for this tremendous virtual reading with Florence Ladd. Gavin Moses has agreed to graciously give the introduction today. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Gavin Moses.
Thank you, James. I appreciate the Grolier having Florence and these wonderful people who are attending. First, I want to say, Florence told me not to do a long introduction, but she's done so much, I can't just not say stuff. So Florence, you must bear with me a little bit here, okay? Here we go. Novelist, poet, educator, Florence Ladd is one of the history makers. There's so much to say about her, so you better look it up. First of all, she was raised in Washington, D.C. to parents who were educators. And in 1953, she graduated from Howard University with a bachelor's in psychology. In 1958, from the University of Rochester, Florence earned a PhD in psychology. She taught at Simmons College, the Harvard Graduate School of Education, the Harvard School of Design, and held deanships at MIT and Wellesley College. Florence was head of Radcliffe's Bunting Institute, where she has encouraged many young writers, including Obama inaugural poet Elizabeth Alexander. Now, here's an interesting factoid. I first met Florence Ladd in 1990, late 1990s, when a Harvard Divinity School fellow classmate, Miranda Pine, took me over Florence's house to show her my poetry. Fast forward 2019, pre-COVID, Florence emailed me about some poems she was working on, and she wanted me to look at them. We met at Harvard Smith Center at a little table near the back. And what happened was something really interesting. An idea came of starting a writing collaborative. She thought about it and the next week agreed. The group is now 5 years strong. Her remarkable contributions to the Academy are bountiful and have garnered her the W.E.B. Du Bois Medal, Harvard's highest honor in the field of African and African-American studies. This factoid also is of note, and I don't know if she wants me to say it or not, but she was a friend of James Baldwin. That's really important. Florence pens accessible poems. Some are sonnets celebrating historical greats such as Madam C.J. Walker. Some of her themes are race, class, marriage, politics, and nature. Although she has accomplished so much in her life, this is what she really wants you to know. After an extensive academic career, Florence Ladd published 2 novels, Sarah's Psalm and The Spirit of Josephine. She has issued 2 chapbooks, Reclaiming Rose, a suite of poems, and the Chevalier de Saint-Georges and His Mother, an epic which she will be reading. Other poems have been published in the Women's Review of Books, The Progressive, the Rockhurst Review, Sweet Auburn, Beyond Slavery, Transition, River Stories, the Golden Shovel Anthology, MUSE, Oberon, and Renga for Obama. A collection of her poems is in progress. With Marian Kilson, she is the co-author of Is That Your Child? Mothers Talk About Rearing Biracial Children. With Gavin Moses, she co-founded Langston's Legacy, a collective of poets. She lived in Cambridge, Massachusetts for several decades and now lives in a village in Burgundy, Flavigny-sous-Ozeron in France. Currently in Paris, she will be reading in her favorite hotel in the 9th arrondissement. And here she is, the one and only Florence Ladd.
Thank you, Gavin, for that extravagant introduction. And thank you, James Fraser. And I want to thank Carol Menkiti for their good works at Grolier and keeping Grolier going. I also want to thank Langston's Legacy, the poetry collective that I meet with weekly, and the Tuesday Poets. Both groups have nurtured my work, listened, criticized, reshaped, and helped little poems get off their little feet and walk. I'm going to read the entire epic, Chevalier de Saint-Georges and His Mother. It's in 2 parts. the first part is about the Chevalier himself. For Paris sojourns, I occupy an apartment on Rue du Chevalier de Saint-Georges. It's a arrondissement plaque dedicated to a man who lived 1739 until 1799, cited as musicien et chef d'orchestre, colonel de la Garde nationale. Who was this man? I asked my neo-Parisian son. He was a beautiful blend, biracial, like me. Too little a description, but enough intrigue to have me seek more stories of this Chevalier, who knew fame and claimed a place in French history. The saga of Le Chevalier de Saint-Georges began at his birth to Nanon, belle of the Antilles, slave, and concubine of Georges de Boulogne Saint-Georges, a wealthy French planter in Guadeloupe, who sired the boy, christened Joseph de Boulogne, called half-breed bastard by the scornful, yet seen as a privileged mulatto, cinnamon skin, curly hair, evidence of wanton, decadent chambering. George had a wife and young daughter, 6 years older than Joseph, who was welcomed as an acquisition to George's household. For Madame de Boulogne Saint-Georges was said to accept George's divided and dual family life, a colonial custom. The Creole chatter, while cutting cane, judged Nanon an enchantress, her son beyond their ken. They said, sharp as a machete, fidgety but clever, can read their Bible and write his name. He sings their songs, likes that tinkly music the master plays more than ours. Oh, he's going to find his whiteness will darken his destiny. Joseph's destiny changed at age 8, when George's swordplay, fatal for an adversary in a fencing duel, had him flee to France, where both his families joined him, though installed apart, wife and daughter in Agen, Nanon and son in the Paris of French gentry. Paris, at the onset of winter, beneath gloomy clouds, sending sleet onto cobblestone streets crowded with carriages stalled, their horses too cold to canter. Even so, Georges went about the city with his tawny tinted progeny, visiting taverns. They stare at us, Papa, and things they say. Haughty gazes and crude slurs had the boy know his father's misalliance scorned. Yet Salon society embraced their audacity. Nanon, shivering, refused exposure to the climate and the clientele of venues George frequented, fearing rebuff. She dreaded being seen, regretted being brought to Paris, regretted being. George, keen to train his fils métis for life amid French aristocracy, enrolled him in Boissier's Academy for Schooling in History, Literature, Philosophy, Music, Horsemanship, and the art of fencing. Other students, sons of nobility, ask, "Who is this gangly, dusky stranger?" Soon they would know Joseph to be best among them in fencing matches, fierce and feared, his rapier at the ready, his wrath and resentment sheathed. Word of Boissier's mulatto spread to Italy and England among fencers eager for en garde to test Saint George's finesse. He came of age in an era when mastering the art of fencing was the key to celebrity. Invited to salons with aristocracy, hunts with nobility, a guest at royal festivals, he fancied dancing with ladies of the court in elegant attire, custom made for his lean-limbed frame. His tailor gained fame. He gained renown as a man about town, Chevalier de Nuit, his intoxicant emitted among Parisians who travel the night. Saint George had rivals and enemies, even more abundant than his admirers, keeping him vigilant, always on guard. In his early years, Saint George played the harpsichord and violin, the latter his instrument of choice. Returning to it in performances, his bow as sprightly as his sword, he won hearty applause, spurring him to compose fast-paced violin concertos, lively chamber music commissioned by Marie Antoinette, and symphonies with Saint George on the podium as chef d'orchestre. In the same epoch, Mozart appeared in Paris, where fans of Saint George proclaimed him their Mozart Noir. In the throes of the French Revolution, Saint George's musical and fencing events gave way to enlistment in the National Guard, with a regiment of men of color designated Légion Nationale des Américains, or Légion Noire. Under the command of Colonel Saint George and his friend, Lieutenant Alexandre Dumas, Lille was defended against a band of royalists. Their advance to Paris halted. Les Noirs heralded. Heroes for an hour, then dispersed, dispatched elsewhere. Tensions between the officers laid bare, stirring suspicions of Saint George's loyalty. Like a candle that glows, flickers, sputters till its charred wick stands in darkness, The fame of Saint George went up in smoke. His past perused. Guests at Versailles festivals. Genuflected the king. Entertained the queen. Has a crest on his ring. Arrested and imprisoned as Citoyen Georges, he endured confinement for nearly a year in despair, under threat of being guillotined. Music, I need music, fetch my violin. Request denied. His music contre nous révolutionnaire. Freed, charges against him dismissed. Free to join Le Cercle de Harmonie, lift the orchestra to new heights as its conductor, before he grew too weak to wave his baton. His Paris orbit diminished, his prestige tarnished. Could refuge and reward await in Guadeloupe? Saint George sailed westward to find disarray. Plantations abandoned, slaves uprising, rebelling. His first home gone. He returned to his last home, humble Paris lodgings, where his caregiver, a Légion Noire veteran, was to hear his adieu. News of his death rippled through Paris. A perfect gentleman, although mulatto, worthy, versatile musician. His fencing years matchless. Unlikely nobleman, an astonishing personage. A publisher rushed to print and issue copies of his concertos and sonatas. Music, his legacy. My son's reflection. The life of this Chevalier, who lived in Paris centuries ago, has given me ease with my identity here. We have always been here. Now, the second part of this epic begins in the voice of the Chevalier's mother, La Belle Nanon. In the season of my 12th hurricane, I took notice of my body, new hair, and breast budding. My mother, Kaya, a Juju woman, gave warning. Monsieur now takes much notice of you, calls you no more la petite Nanon, but la belle Nanon. His look impure, the madame in fear. Kaya's death soon followed her words, and Monsieur came to console me with his body. He consoled me often, and I came to take pleasure in pleasing him, hearing his merci, ma belle, until the morning when taste changed in my mouth, my nipples swollen, in my head a thunderstorm. The trouble he cast into my body, I prayed to Kaya to draw out. My tears like rains in hurricanes. One night the babe, a boy, came to me. Joseph, I named him for Jesus' father, a name in Monsieur's holy book. First to come into my cabin to see him, Madame, who bent close. Sa couleur, oui, il est un Boulogne-Saint-Georges. Next day, Monsieur came to embrace the baby, gave me a rosary, and merci, ma belle. Oh, how I hated him and loved him. This section begins with Creole chatter. Moved her and the babe from the Canefield cabin into the Becky's house. They shout from plantation to plantation on Basse-Terre. Given frocks and pinafores Monsieur's late sister wore. Nanon, in French disguise, wears like a crown her three-pointed red mattress plaid headdress. Nanon helps the housemaid, sweeping, cooking, laundering, sewing, and heeds Madame's talk of customs and mannerly conduct. Like warp and weft in shared household chores, Nanon and her Madame weave a tapestry of domesticity in black and white. In harmony, they eat the same yams, hope for good crops, dread the hurricane season, and crave the scent and caress of the same man. Nanon's voyage. Sailing eastward from Basse-Terre toward France, sailing with her son and their meager belongings, sailing on a schooner, shipping rum, cocoa, tobacco, sailing with a brash crew, a priest, and a stylish artist, crossing the murky ocean at the mercy of winds, crossing but not moving in windless hours of fear, crossing countless days and the darkest of nights, crossing with fingers clutching a juju charm, hearing waves buffet the ship and splash the deck, hearing the crew's tales of monsters and ghosts, hearing in African tongues cries from the seabed, hearing rats gnaw the cargo, claw her son's quilt, seeing the artist paint her face on a black swan, seeing the priest offer bread, wine, and hope, seeing her son's elation when riding whitecaps, seeing at last a landmass, her destination, France. Nanon summons George Bologna. Paris is not the paradise you promised. Our gilded rooms are grand, but I am amid gentry with no bonjour for me. On the streets and lanes I traverse, faces dark like mine are scarce. One or two in the course of a day. The sun is truant from the Paris sky. I miss the light of the sun, forest of Burgundy, guavas, plantains, and warmth in all seasons. Winter is cold, and colder are Parisian women, except nuns in the order Our Lady of Calvary, who visit me, pray with me, pray for me. You claimed you longed for me. You brought me here to be alone. You come to see me so rarely. You pull my son away, push him and his talent with saber and bow into fancy Paris society. His music lifted and lit my soul. Now he is well known, so celebrated, he has no time to play for his mother. Enough of solitary years in your fine prison. Sisters in Our Lady of Calvary have offered a community to calm what has so vexed me and comfort me with their pious company. Adieu. And here ends the epic. When I began to compose Nanon, I thought of Rose. Rose was my maternal great-grandmother. She was born on an island, an Outer Banks island of North Carolina. She lived on that island as a slave her entire life. She was born in 1836, a century after Nanon. She died a slave still in 1909. After the Civil War, still in bondage in a sense. And I thought of Rose's voice, and it was in the chapbook, Reclaiming Rose, that I revisited what I imagine was her life. I want to read just 2 poems from Reclaiming Rose, Rose's soliloquy, and then a closing poem that Gavin requested. Rose's soliloquy. People buy you and sell you, trade you for a cook stove. Wish they'd sold me with Isaac. Lord, how I miss him. Wish I could fly away like a bird yonder over the water. Wish I could swim like the fishes. I'd swim away from here. He, their master, and their father, shows no sympathy, no shame. My ill-begotten children know not to speak of how they got here. When my girls near grown, they got to go away. I work all day long. My girls, they learn to work alongside me. Don't they know we're tired? Bone tired of doing their bidding. God knows I need the balm of Gilead. to heal my tired, tortured soul. Rose's funeral pyre. And this is what I heard of Rose's end from my early childhood, from my mother, who more than once described how Rose's life ended. A March afternoon wind found Rose roasting oysters in bonfire embers. A sudden gale blew sparks onto her long homespun cotton skirts. Ablaze, Rose shrieked amid flames flaring up, blanketing her in heat and the scent of her flesh burning. Islanders buried the remains of her accidental cremation. Gone, their constant help, Rose, their unemancipated slave. Thank you. I'll entertain questions.
Oops. Thank you, Florence, so very much. I did want to hear, do you have the Madam C.J. Walker one with you at all?
No, I don't.
Okay, that's okay. It's a good poem too. Okay, taking questions. I guess we can go straight to them, but okay. First, what made you come up with Le Chevalier?
Well, it was seeing the plaque on the street in Paris, at the corner of the intersection of the 1st and the 8th arrondissement, a very posh section of Paris. And I just
Go ahead.
as the epic begins, I asked Michael, and a term that he used describing his own composition, racial composition, when he was very young, he continued to use a beautiful blend, he said.
Great. Do you recall what made you write your very first poem?
When I was in elementary school, during World War II. And I'm embarrassed even to recall the opening line. Hooray, hooray for MacArthur. And it won a prize of, I think, 5 savings stamps.
That's funny. Okay, I'll open it up. Does anybody have any questions?
Or comments?
Marion. We can't hear you.
Florence, what are you working on now?
I'm working on some poems about, well, it started with Dido, and then I moved to Nefertiti, and one queen takes me to yet another queen.
The recent queen?
And to think about how African American musicians have appropriated regal titles, and so we have, and I do have a poem about that, about some of that here, a poem about our own royalty. I'll read a few lines.
Okay.
revered in our time, artists claiming regal titles, elevating their performances. King Oliver, Nat King Cole singing Straighten Up and Fly Right, Count Basie on piano, Fly Me to the Moon, Duke Ellington's band on the A Train. Along came Prince, his given name, guiding us into the purple rain. Ella Fitzgerald reigned and scattered as the queen of jazz. Queen Latifah, whose mother told her all women are queens, raps with imperial femininity on rights of women. Prideful reach to the past, claiming titles linked to the ruling class, enthroned the majesty of their music. That's some of what I'm working on.
That's fun.
Nice. Any other questions? Yes.
Florence, have you had occasion to hear any of the recent performances of the Le Chevalier's music?
Yes, only on CDs, yes.
Mhm.
A CD of his violin concertos was given to me. And I know of many performances now.
Yes.
And somebody told me the Lyric Opera is going to perform one of his operas in Boston. Is that, anyway, last year, a biography, a genuine sort of, well, semi-fictional biography of the Chevalier was published by a historian, Claude Ribet.
Mhm.
Okay, and in the appendix, there is a comprehensive list of recordings of his many compositions,
Mhm.
including 3 symphonies, several concertos, some works for chamber music, other works for chamber music. It's extraordinary, the number of compositions that are part of his
Mhm.
legacy,
Mhm.
and that now are being discovered, performed. Some of the earliest performances or recordings were by German orchestras and chamber music groups.
A lot of his work is being streamed by Portland, Oregon, classical music, and you can hear it almost any time. And I hear it sometimes almost weekly. So they have embraced him completely.
Thank you.
And there's a movie.
Yeah, I haven't seen the film, but I've seen a trailer about the film Chevalier.
Danielle, Georges has a question.
Thank you, Florence, for this beautiful reading. My question to you has to do with your sense of your evolution as a poet. Are there poems or types of poems that you're writing now that maybe you didn't write 10 years ago or 20 years ago? I'm thinking about ARC.
Yes, yeah. I have looked with embarrassment at poems I wrote maybe 40 years ago. Bucolic poems inspired by my Vermont landscape. And I recognize how little I knew about form, and how few risks I took at that time. there are very few poems from that period that touch on personal experiences. And few poems that had to do with race at that time. There's been an interesting arc, and thank you for asking, Danielle, to help me think about that, and perhaps to retrace that arc and go back to what was between the lines or behind some of those poems.
Thank you. Danielle's also a member of Langston's Legacy. I needed to point that out as well. Any other questions? Yes?
Hi, Florence. You have written nonfiction work. You've written 2 novels. What is it about poetry? Why do you choose poetry now? What is it about poetry that calls you, that what does it offer you that those other forms do not offer you?
Thanks for asking, Jenny. Poetry offers the possibility of closure. I can finish a poem, but undertaking a novel at this stage would make for a lot of unfinished business. And getting closer to some issues that really matter for me. I'm finding my way into those issues, themes, concerns, problems, more directly in poetic language than I do if I would perhaps write an essay about some things. And language, it's very nice to be bathed in language, as you know.
Mhm.
Thanks, Florence.
Yes, Delhi.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. It's David Leeming, actually. I don't know how I got to be called Delhi, but I wanted to ask Florence whether there are particular poets that have influenced her.
Well, Lucille Clifton comes to mind first. And I spent a season reading from cover to cover every one of Lucille Clifton's poems, and sort of annotating the collection. Evie Shockley is a poet I read now from time to time. And I can't say that Evie Shockley's work influences mine, but certainly when I've thought of certain things to write about, and I thought I would write a poem about W.E.B. Du Bois. And then I read Evie Shockley's poem, and she said it all in that poem in powerfully beautiful language. And well, they come to mind first. But certainly Lucille Clifton is somebody I lean on. Elizabeth Bishop, I was reminded of her importance in my thinking. And Emily Dickinson, surprise, surprise, is there. Have I mentioned any male poets? No, I haven't, David.
That's all right, Florence. If I were a poet, I'd be jealous, but.
Any other questions? Florence, how has your poetry affected your son, Michael? He's also a poet.
You might ask how his poetry has affected me. That's it's complicated. Certainly, I read poems to him as bedtime stories because, again, you could finish the poem and say goodnight. And you could read some very short poems to him, and he or I would fall asleep. His poetry is of a different genre, as you know. He is at a reading tonight. He is drawn to music as well. And the musicianship in him is taking, I would say sometimes it's more dominant than his poetry at the moment. He would have to answer that though. And I'd be interested in his response.
Well, if there aren't any more questions, oh, there's Andrea. Let's say she pops on.
Hi.
Hi, Andrea, how are you? She's another member of Langston's Legacy. She's in New York.
So good to see you all. Thank you so much, Florence, for sharing your work with us and the beauty and all of it. I really enjoyed hearing about, with Danielle's question about the arc that you've taken throughout the years with poetry. I wanted to ask about the arc through writing these poems about Chevalier. Were there any major learnings, I guess, throughout the process, and any things that surprised you along the way?
What surprised me was that there was so very little about Nanon. No portraits of her, no documents, no letters, nothing to draw on, but just a few references. And even in this new, very rich biography of Chevalier Saint-Georges, there is little to draw on. What I learned more about the French Revolution. That is the one that happened in the 18th century, not the current one. And what surprised me, just the genius of this figure, the genius of Le Chevalier de Saint-Georges, the moments in his life. And I was not surprised to learn about attacks on him, about his experience of racism. And at the same time, the way in which he was cherished and held in high esteem by the society, by the high society of his time. His was an extraordinary life, an extraordinary experience. And then to learn more about his music, to hear it, and just to see a list now of his complete oeuvre. Just as much to learn from this life, from one person's life. And I'm sure that's, if you look at lives, there's more than first presents itself.
Great. Any other, I hope that answered your question, Andrea. Any other questions? Yes.
I'm Vida.
Oh, why does it say that? Oh, sorry, Vida. Sorry, looking at the wrong one.
She's one of the.
Florence, you've had such an incredibly rich and interesting life. And I'm wondering whether you are writing a memoir, an autobiography, or someone else is interviewing you to write something about you.
I've started a memoir. I made a false start, but I think I now have a structure for it. Jennifer Ladd, who was on screen a little while ago, interviewed me a few times. And there's some material there, I think, to draw on. It's, well, there's a lot to look back on. And I hope I have time for what this project, the memoir project, may require. Thank you, Vida.
Thank you. It was lovely to listen to you.
Thank you. Gavin, may I read a closing poem? I know you're trying
Of
to.
course, I know which one you're going to read. I hope it's the one, but go ahead.
It's called a meditation at the moment. Late life for the long-lived is a lonely country. Its flag at half-mast, anthem a dirge, Constitution with no amendments, memorial services, major events. Uncharted territory, borders on the unknowable. The landscape changes. Well-known landmarks removed, replaced with digital signs. The horizon moves closer. Music is different. No one knows the lyrics my mind sings. A time is without hands that circumface numbers. Days are shorter and longer. Nights sleepless, awaiting the last breath. Thank you.
Thank you, Florence. Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody, for coming. James, I turn it over to you.
Thank you, Florence. Can you guys hear me okay?
Thank you.
I want to give one more round of applause for Florence for the beautiful reading. That was magnificent. We have some copies of the book for sale at the shop if anyone would like to purchase one. Thank you so much for coming. I hope everyone has a wonderful day.
Thank you, Florence. Thank you, Grolier.
Thank you, Florence. It was beautiful.
Thank you so much, Florence.
Thank you, Florence.
Wonderful.
Florence.
Thank you, Florence. It was gorgeous.
Thank you, Florence. It's
you,
wonderful. Absolutely wonderful to see you and hear your voice.
Oh,
And-
you made our day.
Yes.
Indeed.
Thank you, Tuesday Poets and Langston's Legacy.
Take care, dear.
Bye, Florence.
Bye.
Bye. See you soon, at least on the screen.
Yeah.
Bye, everyone. Signing off.
Okay, bye-bye.